You're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Okay. It
there
says we're live, so I guess we're live.
We're in.
That's great. So we may not feel live, but we are live. Okay. You have excellent lighting. I have horrible lighting, but
anyway, I went all around my house trying to find. Honestly, it's just from my window.
Oh, natural light is always the best. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Well, hey, everybody. I am Renee Steelman. I am your host of She Became Visible today. And I will be introducing my co-host, Tricia, is going to be joining us occasionally when we can fit her into our schedule as co-host on She Became Visible. And so we're going to spend today introducing. Now, do you want to go by Tricia rather than Tricia?
I do. Yes, that's a good question. So my name is Tricia, but honestly, my whole entire life, I've only gone by Tricia until I went to college. And then I guess it was more mature,
Yeah.
But I like Tricia.
Okay, that's excellent. Then that's what we will go by. And that in the background is my son, TJ. He is going to be joining because we're filming today from home, not in the studio. I'm hoping that I'm trying to put some distance in between me and the camera. But I'm hoping that the sound, I don't think the sound is going to be that great, but I have a new laptop and I have to tell you, I hate it. I had an old 2015 MacBook Pro. I loved it, but it was old. And so it wasn't able to do some of the updates. So I thought, fine, I'll bite the bullet and buy a new one. Well, this one has there's no connections. I can't put my headphone in there. I can't put my microphone into it. It's that they're all very weird and strange little holes.
Everything is Bluetooth. Yeah. Everything's Bluetooth now.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't have time for this. Okay. Now I got to hit a Bluetooth microphone. So I'm hoping that this is not going to be horrible, but I'm going to turn down the volume to his music too a little bit. So there you go. I only have so much elevator music before we'll go crazy. Okay. So She Became Visible. Tricia, you are going to become visible today. Tell us a little bit. Tricia is from the Pacific Northwest, where I came from before we moved to Arizona. And I have to tell you, it's fall, and this is the only time of year that I am just so missing the Pacific Northwest because I want to see the changing of the leaves. I want the corn stalks, the pumpkins. When you put pumpkins out, first of all, I have to tell you, I think I've told this story before, but Tricia, I don't know if you've heard this. When we first moved here, I went to the grocery store and I'm filling up some pumpkins in my grocery cart. And the young man helping to bag groceries says, "What are you doing with these pumpkins?" And I said, "I'm just going to put them outside for decoration." He goes, "Oh no, javelinas love pumpkins." And I was like, "Oh gosh, I don't know if you've ever seen a javelina, but they're oh my gosh, they are like a creature from space. They are the ugliest, freakiest creatures that I've ever seen in my life. And they have really bad vision, but they have really good smell. And my daughter was actually here visiting and she took her dog for a walk and they will go after a dog. So,
are they out at night?
Yeah, they come out at night when the weather's cooler. And they love pumpkins. They will eat all your cactus. They just love it when people move into nature and plant food for them,
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, there will be no pumpkins. So I have plastic pumpkins outside. So anyway, but I love and miss the Pacific Northwest. What is your weather like today?
Oh, it's gorgeous today. It is. Yeah, it's beautiful. I would say 75, sunny, little breeze. Yeah, it's beautiful. But we live on the east side of Washington. And so it's the more deserty side.
Yes.
Yes. So we don't get as many we do have trees, but not like on the west side. So yeah. But it is beautiful
amazing
today.
Yeah, that's amazing when people, they just assume that an entire state has the same climate as whatever. And I remember even living, we moved here from Vancouver, Washington, which is almost Portland. Yeah. And my husband worked in Seattle. And I remember when he first started working in Seattle, I thought, I'll go up with you. I'll do some shopping and get to know. And I went up there a couple of times and I was like, no, it rains more here. And that is not okay. So it rains enough in Portland. Thank you very much. Yeah. I don't need 5 more days of this. So yeah. So it's crazy. But yeah, you live on the eastern side where there's more desert and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, all right. Well, that's great. Well, Tricia, tell us a little bit. Now, I know that I have interviewed both members and non-members on this channel, and I don't want it to be a completely ex-Mormon channel. Sure. However, that is a big part of my life, and it is a lot of my She Became Visible part of my life. So sure. It's going to be in there whether I like it or not, and hopefully it will be interesting. And it will help others to understand that everybody is in a different place in their life. And for my husband and I, well, my husband is still a very true believing Mormon. In fact, he is actually at conference right now.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So I keep looking for him in the audience to see if I can see him, but he's having a great time. He ran into some old friends of ours from years ago, and he's just having a great time. But anyway, so he is a true believing Mormon. I left the church about 2 years ago. And so but when I left the church, we had just moved to Arizona. We had probably been down here for about 2 years, and none of our children were down here. Our children are all grown and gone. Most of our children have also left the church. So I wasn't in the same place as those who are trying to leave with a true believing member husband or wife with young children that are baptismal age. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff. I don't have, my oldest brother is not a member of the church. My youngest brother is 8 years younger. And so we kind of live in different worlds. And so I just didn't have a lot of the struggles that a lot of the people have. So I don't use my life as any kind of an example of how, no, it's easy. You just put in a resignation letter and walk out. So tell us what your story is.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. Okay. So I did grow up in the church. In fact, both sides of my family, mom and dad, you can trace all the way pretty much to Joseph Smith. Wow. As a matter of fact, one of my claims to fame that I didn't even know I had was that I'm related to Fanny Alger. People say Alger, but it's
That's
Alger.
Amazing.
Yeah. So she's my great aunt. So her parents are my great grandparents. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was actually a huge chunk on my shelf when I found that out. So, but
did you know about her though? I mean, was her name or her story ever brought up in family home evenings? Or?
No, absolutely not. And what's really interesting is that I think at one point as I was growing up, I saw her name in something somewhere in passing, like maybe a church, Sunday school manual or something, maybe Relief Society. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I have the same last name. So that's my mom's maiden name.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So when I saw it, I thought about it, but I didn't think enough of it to really look into it or anything because I didn't really know the story. Like there was, just a gloss over.
Her name was just a genealogical name.
I think maybe at the time it had said something about that maybe she was one of Joseph Smith's polygamous wives. Maybe it said something like that.
Okay.
I don't know for sure. But so it wasn't until recently when I really started looking into things that I saw the name again. And I asked my mom and I was like, are we related to her? And she's like, oh yeah, and she knew all about it. And I'm all like, and she's a true believing, she's in. So that was rough for me. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, raised in the church. My dad was bishop of the singles ward when I think I was married by the time, but he was in bishoprics all along growing up. My grandpa was actually a stake patriarch in southern Utah, and I actually got my patriarchal blessing from my grandpa, so that was awesome. Yeah. I'm actually related. I don't know if I should, name drop.
So, absolutely. I mean, did you just listen to conference? That's all it was name dropping. Oh, Heber C. Kimball was my great-great-grandpa. I'm like, yeah, of course we know that, whatever.
So, well, okay. So I am actually, my uncle is Paul Reeve. I don't know if you know that name. He's the one who wrote the Blacks in the Priesthood essay.
Yes. Okay. I have heard his name.
Yeah. So I have quite a lot of very strong members of the church in my family. So grew up, in the middle of all that. My parents were awesome. I never, felt like I was treated poorly or anything. I think the most I did they had high expectations, and we were expected to live up to those, but they, I think they did a great job. We found out later that my dad had depression, which explained a lot of the things that he did. He was kind of standoffish as a dad, just kind of do what I say, and like that kind of thing. But it was interesting to see once we were all grown and started having our own kids before we found out that he had depression, and that they started doing something about that, and that helped.
Now, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Okay, so there's 6 of us, 3 girls and 3 boys.
Okay.
And I am the second oldest. I have an older brother and then me. And we had the definite gender roles for sure. Like my older brother was in charge of the chores and milking the cows. We had a small, couple cows and horses in our backyard. I grew up in Idaho in near Pocatello. And so we had some things like that. So he did all the chores and I babysat the kids and helped clean the kitchen and do the dishes and, very gender role. So, and now, so out of the 6 of us, only 2 of us are still in the church.
Wow. And who was the first to exit?
Probably my youngest sister. And she ended up getting married very young to someone who was not a member. So I think that kind of made the difference there. I would say I'm probably the latest to leave, actually. So I would say I left the church. I haven't officially taken my name off the records. I've at this point decided I'm going to leave them on in case I ever feel like there's something that I could do to make a change. And I would be able to say, I'm still a member. I have a say. So I don't know. I don't know how long that will stay that way. But so I probably left the church 2020, somewhere in there.
Okay. And your husband, tell your husband and how you guys met.
Okay. So I was raised very, very Mormon, everything. I actually had a boyfriend who went off on a mission. And while he was gone, I met my husband. And my husband was not a member of the church. He was actually in the Navy. And I almost broke up with him, went and talked to the bishop because, what am I going to do? I'm falling in love with this guy, but, it's not right. So talked to the bishop and he literally said to me, well, I think you know what you need to do. And so I went to break up with him and he said, and he was like, why are you breaking up with me? And I was like, well, have you ever said something? And as you say it, you're like, I can't believe that came out of my mouth. And I said, well, because you're not a member of my church. Like, that's weird, And he says, well, you never even asked me if I wanted to learn about your church. And
my gosh.
Yeah. So I said, oh, okay. So he did take some missionary discussions, but it never really went any farther than that. But by that point, I'm too far in. He's a great guy. Just really loved him, treated me so well. And so we did end up getting married, which was also a big deal in Pocatello, Idaho, to marry somebody who's not a member. Somebody in the Navy, somebody with tattoos, all of these things. His family is from Texas.
And what year was this?
So we got married in 1992. Yep. And his family drove up from Texas for the wedding, and we were married. We got married in the Mormon chapel.
Okay.
And our bishop did marry us. He's very kind. But I still have memories. My best friend sitting through the wedding ceremony, bawling. I mean, bawling. I mean, like bawling.
Yeah.
And not because she was happy.
No,
because she was heartbroken.
She thought your life was you were destroying your life,
destroying
right
my life
before her eyes.
Yes.
Wow.
It was a little embarrassing, and I, to this day, am like, why did you even come? Like, that was,
yeah. She had to witness it. Maybe she thought she could, you could be a runaway bride. She could be there for you. Yeah.
Run off with me. Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So, he was always a great guy. So we got married and talked about that we would raise any kids Mormon, because he didn't really have a strong religion. He was Christian, but not really a strong religion. And so when we had our first daughter 2 years later, because that's what you do, is get married at 20 and have a baby 2 years later.
Or 9 months later, or however it works out.
Right?
Or 6 months later.
We won't tell anybody about that. But but I have to tell you another story though. So I have to tell you this, because back it up a little bit. Yeah. My poor husband, after we got married, the first week or so, I would get up in the middle of the night and go in the living room and just cry for hours. And he would come in and he's like, what is wrong? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I didn't, like, I don't know. And I would bawl. The poor guy, I don't know why he didn't just be like, I'm out.
Yeah. You're crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't until now when I finally left the church and I was able to look back on what was happening to me at the time. And I still don't know what was the bigger trigger, but I think one was having sex. Was a big deal.
Yeah.
Even though I was married. And the other one was marrying someone who's not a member. And I don't know if it was a combination of the both. I don't know what it was, but I was a wreck for probably
because you realize suddenly, like, I've made a commitment here that I don't know if I can get out of. And this may be the biggest mistake of my life, even though I'm very happy and he treats me like a goddess.
But everybody else is telling me it's wrong. Everybody else is telling me, you're ruining your life and what have you done? And, you're going to go to hell now. Like, like, what am I going to do?
You're so like,
I don't even know how he stuck through it. I'll be honest, but he did. Once again, he's an awesome man. So and it's funny because it wasn't until just recently that I look back on that and think, wow, that brainwashing did a number. But anyway, so we had a baby 2 years later. And so he started taking the missionary discussions again, because he wanted he said he wanted to be able to explain to the kids why he didn't believe. So he wanted to know. So did your dad bless the baby, or who blessed the baby? He did. Yeah. So by this time, my husband in the Navy, we had moved to Virginia. We lived in Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. And so my parents came to Norfolk and blessed the baby. And she was the oldest grandchild. So that was
so she was worshipped and adored, and all things forgiven.
Yes.
A baby girl. Yeah.
And I do have to say, my parents were always very supportive. Like, I know they were disappointed that I married somebody who wasn't a member, but they were not judgmental. They didn't like, I'll never talk to you again. Like, they were very supportive. And, and so, my dad came out and blessed the baby, and it was beautiful. You know what? Actually, I think I took her to Pocatello. I think she was blessed in Idaho. Now that I think about it, because my husband was gone a lot in the Navy.
Yes. That makes sense.
Well,
and they were happy that you were still in, and you were getting your children blessed and baptized. So, you're doing your thing, and and it was good. It really was. And I was out and in active. I was active-ish because, it was easy to not go to church when my husband wasn't going to church. So, Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can.
Okay. I'm going to take this off because it's very muffled. So hopefully this will work. Okay, go ahead.
We'll see. So he decided, the baby was about 6 months old when he decided that he wanted to get baptized. He decided that he did that research into the church. He was reading the Book of Mormon, and he had that, special feeling, the calm feeling that, I'm doing what's right. And so he decided to get baptized. my parents did fly out for the baptism, and my dad baptized him. So that was special, and what was funny was, I don't know, somehow in my head, I thought, well, now that he's baptized, everything will be perfect. Like, he'll be the perfect priesthood holder. Everything will be great. Life will be awesome. And
got a
it
great
does not work
story
that way.
to tell in conference. Your parents can talk about you, and everyone lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have these stories if people aren't willing to marry non-members.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yes. And it was, he's always been a great man, but like, I think I expected him to know everything and do everything and be the person, and first of all, even somebody raised in the church can't do all of those things.
Right.
But second of all, he didn't even know what the expectations were. Like, he wasn't raised in the church. He had no idea.
Completely different language, different responsibilities that, home teaching, priesthood blessings, all the stuff that
family home evening.
A family home evening. Yeah.
Yes.
My parents were converts, and I remember when they tried to do family home evening for the first time, and they gather us all around the table, my brother and I, and my little brother was a baby. And they start like, well, is there anything that you'd like to talk about that maybe we could improve of as a family? And I mean, everybody was crying and screaming and yelling after 15 minutes. And they're like, never mind. I don't think we ever tried it again. So
that sounds about right. Yeah. So I tried to do family home evening because I thought I was supposed to, and it was important. And I don't think family home evening in and of itself is a bad thing. I think it's important to spend time together as a family. And we did try to kind of alternate between like lessons sometimes and then going out and doing things as a family. And I do think that spending time as a family is important. I think it's helped our family a lot.
Yeah, and there's a lot of religions that have adopted the family home evening program, and so it's not that it's a bad program. And in fact, I don't know if the Mormon Church even invented it.
I doubt it. Yeah,
somebody, but I mean, of course, all of these things are good things. It's not that. So that's a moot point, but yeah.
Yeah. But I think I put a lot of pressure on him for, why aren't you taking charge? Why aren't you making sure we do prayers and doing, all of these things? And on top of that, he was gone all the time because he was in the Navy and on submarines. So he was out and in. And so I pretty much did everything. And then he would come home and be the visitor. And and not just church stuff, like anything, like I just took care of everything. And so it was rough because I don't think that he really felt like he was an integrated part of the family.
And I've heard that from like, who was I talking to the other day? Not even a member of the church. And she was saying the same thing. Her dad was a truck driver and was gone all the time. And he would come home on the weekends and should be like, don't start disciplining the children. You're not in charge here. You don't even know how this whole thing works. I've heard that a lot from people who have husbands that travel or are gone all the time, because they come in, they think, okay, I'm the dad, I'm home now. And the moms are like, no, we got a system here,
Yeah. And that was very much me. I'm a problem solver. What's wrong? Let me fix it. And so I always, so I knew what needed to be done. And I do think that made him building relationships with the kids difficult. He had a hard time with that.
So how many children did you end up having?
So we have 4. So our oldest.
While your kids were growing up, because he traveled a lot, was he able to hold any positions or any callings?
He did mostly. He was the ward missionary for like ever. Because that's something that he could come and go. And plus, because he was a convert, he knew, how to, so but then when we moved to Georgia, he was going to shore duty. So he wasn't out and in. And it was a military community, but it was a small military community. So we were also integrated into the outside community. And, but most of the people running the ward were military. And so he was actually Elders Quorum president when we were there. And I was Relief Society president at the same time. So that was fun. And we had 2 little kids at home. So I remember tag teaming on Sunday mornings when we had all the meetings and stuff.
Yes.
We'd bring our kids to church in their pajamas, put them in the nursery with their treats. So our daughter was 5, maybe a little bit older, 7-ish. And then our son was 2-ish. And so she would kind of babysit him in the nursery while we went to our meetings. And then we'd come and get them all dressed and go to church and that.
As you're saying that, I'm visualizing in my head the chaos in the morning of you packing their clothes, packing the food, getting all your paperwork, getting all your stuff. Everybody's got, an hour before church is supposed to start so that you can get everything set up. I mean, the chaos.
It was crazy. Yeah. And then, of course, towards the end of my presidency, of course, I got pregnant. So then I was pregnant doing all those things. So that's the way it goes. Yeah.
No big deal.
No big deal. Yeah. So he's been pretty active. The last few years, he actually was the Boy Scout leader. So that not only took up a lot of time from life, but from the family. Right. So that was difficult when he was Boy Scout leader for, 5 or 6 years. And he would use his 2 weeks of vacation every year to go to scout camp. So
my husband worked 6 days a week. He was in construction and left at 6 o'clock in the morning, didn't get home till 6 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And every Saturday was, some kind of a youth activity or service project. And then on Sunday, he was usually in some kind of position of authority. And so there was no, and then we got into a huge fight one time because he was in the Elders Quorum. He was the Elders Quorum president. And it was spring break and I was sick of the rain. And so I said, let's go to Canada. And which, is an Indian, Native American, reservation in the middle of Oregon. And it's desert and it's, warm. And I said, I got to get out of this rain. I'm going to book a teepee for us to sleep in. It's going to be so fun. I think we had 5 kids at the time. And he said, I can't. We have an Elders Quorum bowling party on Saturday. And I was like, there's a few other people that can handle that. And he's like, no, I'm the Elders Quorum president. I have to be there. And I'm like, see you later, dude. And I took the kids and went there and there's a whole story. But that's the hardest part when the little time they have, is then and the thing is, like you were saying, you're indoctrinated to be the bad one. You're the bad one because you're like, he's serving God. He's sacrificing for the Lord. Look how blessed we are because of what he's done. Yeah. And, and the kids, we had the funniest stories. That whole weekend was a fiasco. But anyway, so oh my gosh, he must have been going crazy. Like get me back to the submarine, please.
Actually, it's really funny. I think so. They had, 14, 16 boys. Like they had a big troop. And they actually said they called him because they knew he would make them behave because he was in the military.
Whip those boys in the face.
And he did. There's more than one story. I don't know if I should tattletale on him, but there's more than one story of him making them do push-ups on Sunday in their white shirts because they're not listening to the teacher. So they were doing.
It's probably the best thing that ever happened to him.
I think so.
Tell us a little bit about, I know you've had some tragedies in your family. So tell us how your family has kind of done the wave of life and how you've handled all of that.
Yeah, you bet. So our oldest daughter passed away when she was 13. So she was 13. So my son was 8, 6, 4. So that's about the age of the kids.
Right.
And she was the oldest. That, of course, was really rough. It was not something we were expecting. She got sick very quickly. She was very healthy. She was a competitive gymnast, actually. She was very talented and just got sick. She got sick in her lungs and basically the infection just ate her lungs. So she died within a month. She was in ICU on life support for almost a month. She was
fine. She got a lung infection and within 1 month she passed on.
And not only that, she was perfectly fine. Like on a Thursday, That Monday, she was in the hospital on life support. It was that quick, like just, yeah. And we happened to be, so we were living in Connecticut at the time, Navy. But my daughter and I had flown to Washington to visit friends from living in the Navy, and she got sick there. And so she was actually at Seattle Children's. And so my husband had to fly out with 3 little kids out to meet us. She was in the hospital there. And then my kids stayed with friends while we lived up at the hospital for a month. So it was pretty crazy. Yeah.
You must have just been in a stupor.
Yeah. It was, yeah.
To have it go that quickly.
It's like living in a different world, like a whole different life. Yeah, it was very strange. And, to go through the ups and downs of she's getting a little bit better and then she's not, and then maybe a little bit better. And then let's try surgery and let's, all of these things. And the whole time she never really woke up. She was in a medical induced coma because of all of the things that she had to be on and stuff. And so we never were able really to talk to her, which was sad. We talked to her, but she didn't talk back.
There was no response.
Yeah. So that was difficult. And then we had everybody fasting for her and praying for her. And, we're reading conference talks to her. I also read Twilight because, she was reading Twilight at the time. So I had to finish it for her. So
I'm ashamed to admit, but that was a page turner for me. I would lay awake at night and go, next book, trilogy, number 2, number 3.
Listen, I am actually an English teacher. I have a degree in English and writing, and I love the Twilight series. I can't.
You read Twilight, Oh my God.
So, but yeah.
Priesthood blessings, of course.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
How did you walk out of that hospital? At what point did they say, she's not going to make it?
So they did finally. So there was a lot of, she was, with her being on life support. You can be on it forever, really, until something bad happens, right? And they really wanted her lungs to heal, was what they were trying to do, was buy time. But it had been taking really a long time. And so they decided that they wanted to do surgery, one, so that they could take a look at her lungs, like how are they really doing? And 2, they thought maybe they could either take a piece of a lung and maybe let the rest of it heal, maybe even take one full lung and, let the other one heal. But when they got in there, they said they were just both really bad, just really bad. Yeah. And so honestly, I feel like once they opened her up and saw it, that they really didn't think there was really anything they could do. They, of course, didn't tell us that. They said, she's doing fine. And then literally 10 minutes later, she's passing away. So pretty much she was bleeding to death because of all the blood thinners she was on, because of she was on, I don't know if you heard the ECMO machine, but it put oxygen in your blood because her lungs weren't working. So that's how she got oxygen. But you have to be on blood thinners to have that. And so having the surgery, and her lungs just weren't going to make it. So yeah.
Now, is this something that they have seen before, or was this, they had seen this before?
They had seen it. It was pretty rare. My brother actually is a PA, and at the time was working at Houston Children's Hospital. And so he had said that, this does happen, but it's pretty rare. And sometimes kids do get better. And so, of course, that's the story they keep telling you. These kids, they go home and, so you're just, but it's actually more of the kids don't make it than do. So I think we kind of knew it was going to happen, but we didn't want to admit it because who wants to admit it? Yeah. So it wasn't a huge shock. I think we were kind of prepared, but I still remember, so we were there to be able to say goodbye and everything. So I appreciated that. My mom just happened to be visiting. She lives in Utah, but she happened to be up visiting. So she was there and able to say goodbye, which was nice. And she also was able to take the kids. So my husband and I could be in there with her and all of that. So,
but you were living in Connecticut at the time. So after spending this time and then your daughter passes away, how do you get your family back to Connecticut?
It was crazy. We actually call it the traveling funeral because we had a funeral in Washington because most of her friends were still in Washington. We had just moved to Connecticut 6 months, 9 months earlier. And so we had a funeral in Washington with her friends, a big, huge thing. It was beautiful. And I'm very grateful for the church because really the people are the ones who put that whole thing together. I couldn't think, I couldn't make decisions, none of that. And they really did do the whole thing for me. It was beautiful. Somebody made her a beautiful white dress with a pink sash. It was gorgeous. She looked beautiful. We put her in a white tank top and shorts under her dress because she was so athletic. We knew she wouldn't want to live eternity in a dress. So she was going to have her. So yeah, it was beautiful.
That thing that's going around social media is like, remember the last outfit you wear if you die in it. That's the outfit. She's like, I'm not wearing a dress for time.
No, she would be mad at me forever. Yeah. So we did that. And then she's actually buried in Southern Utah next to my dad. So really? we had a graveside funeral down there in Southern Utah. And so she's buried next to my dad. And then we went to Connecticut, which is where we now live. Now, we don't now, but then, and had another memorial service there with her new friends and people from church and school. And and she's still, there are some girls that were friends with her. Really, they didn't know each other for less than a year, but they still are in contact with me. Sweet, sweet girls. And they, check in with me. And so we call that the traveling funeral. It was crazy.
I'm so sorry. I cannot even imagine. I mean, the whole, like I said, I'm visualizing the entire scenario. You're going, oh, hey, we're going to go out and visit some friends and everybody's healthy and happy. And then to end so tragically, I can't even imagine. How did any of that was probably that probably boosted your testimony of the gospel just because of how great the church is in times like this. I mean, they are number one for people on board and stepping in and service. And I mean, it is not replicable, I swear.
Yes. Anyway. And it is one of those things that people say, people will say you can feel the prayers, you can feel people boosting you, and you can you can feel that it's palpable, and it's not just let me bring you dinner, but you can feel the energy. That's all I can call it. And it did boost my testimony. And, the teachings of the church about you will see your child again and you will be able to raise them in the next life. And, those are the things that got me through. Not to say that I did not go through a depression, because I did, and that time to feel like it's not worth living without my child. But I had 3 others. So,
Have you felt like, because of this tragedy, has it changed your perspective as far as worrying more about your other 3 children, where before you were like, what are you talking about? We're healthy. Everything's fine. But now you find yourself, every little thing is like,
not too much, actually. I'm just not a worrier. It does make things more real, if that makes sense. Like things could happen. It does any day, something could happen, and it makes things more real. But I've never been one of those people that's like, I'm going to wrap you in bubble wrap. You can't go anywhere. You can't do it. You have to live. You have to do your thing. But it does make things more real. And it does, I think, if nothing else, makes you enjoy life and make sure that you are, make sure you make it worth it. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I think when you've got it, a lot depends on your personality, because I was never a doomsday person. I never thought anything bad could happen. I mean, even when my parents got divorced when I was like 7, I remember going, I mean, whatever. My mom got remarried. Guy was great. I mean, I took life really lackadaisically. And so, but, losing, losing a son-in-law and having, disabled grandchildren and a disabled son. And, I'm not a worrier, but I also am very aware that the other shoe could drop any minute.
Yes.
I don't worry about it, but I do think about it more. And I'm like, I won't be surprised when another tragedy happens.
Yeah.
So,
yes. And what's interesting is, I think it's interesting how you said it kind of depends on your personality.
Right.
So I have a friend from high school, not a member of the LDS church, but she was one of those people that is, bad things are always happening to her, like always happening to her, always.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to her after my daughter had passed away, a couple of years after she had passed away. And, she said to me, she says, well, you don't understand what it's like. Like nothing bad ever happens to you. And I was like, I think maybe you've forgotten. I had a child pass away, and it was interesting to me how, I guess because of the way that I do handle things that, she did forget that I had a child who passed away.
That's a really good point that you make though, because we, because I handle things better than maybe some others would, people assume that it's no big deal, And so, having a disabled child, I was there every Sunday, no big deal. 9:00 church. Absolutely. Bring in a couple grandkids with me, you just do what you have to do. So they're like, yeah, she's fine, and I was fine because I do have that personality.
Yeah.
But then there were other times when I was like, you know what? I'm really sick of this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, oh, can you say that out loud? And I'm like, there's probably a lot of people that really would like to say, I don't like this and I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. It's not fair.
So it's just what it is. I had a friend that was the same thing. She was like, every time we'd get together we would offer to help. We would say, can we come over and help you paint? Can we hang your pictures for you? She just loved being miserable. So it was like, whatever.
No, I understand. Yep.
Yeah. So so what was the downfall? So you were saying maybe 2020 was where you started to go,
Well, I think 2020 I would call is my actual break. Like I'm done. But I would say it was kind of
cognitive dissonance going on.
There was some slow little things happening. And I do think my daughter passing eventually actually did become something that I started. It was all of that, well, if you pray, God answers your prayers. Well, if you're doing the right things, God answers your prayers. And, all of these people fasting for her and praying for her. And, I'm not a perfect person, but I was living a pretty darn good life. Right. And yet my daughter died for no reason, really. And it wasn't that I was expecting that your life is perfect when you're a member of the church, for sure. But it was that, then why? So why is this for some people and why is this for other people? Like why? And one of the things that I started thinking about was praying. That was one thing that I was like, okay, if I pray, and it really doesn't matter what happens when I pray, because I either have to trust that God's either going to answer my prayer or God's going to know better than me. And then I just have to trust that he knows better than me. And that's his answer. So then what's the point of me praying? Why can't I just trust that God knows?
Same thing.
And if God knows, why do I need to change? It's fine. So
your prayers just turn into, hey, thanks for the great day. I don't know what you got planned for tomorrow, but whatever it is, evidently I don't have any control over it. So
whatever happens, happens. Yeah.
Whatever happens. Yeah. So,
and so I honestly did this. I actually said to myself, I'm going to test something. I'm just going to stop praying. I'm just going to trust. I'm just going to trust that whatever happens is what God wants to happen. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to be a good person. And I'm going to see if it's any different. It's no different. It's no different. Right. What's different? Right. Absolutely nothing. Right. So that was the beginning of,
great things happened, which people would call a blessing, and bad things happen, which people would call a trial and
or a curse, depends on who you are. Yeah.
Tricia, that my talk in, I spoke at Sunstone this last year, and that's exactly what my talk was on. I read this book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, by a rabbi. And he said, I've worked with too many people that have had tragedy in their life. And then I've had other people that swear that God had a hand in saving their life, and he said, I've just come to believe that God is not sitting behind his computer and go, well, who needs a tumor today?
Yes.
Who would love to? We're going to test, Susie Q.
Yeah,
and
it does make sense.
To the point where your prayers, if you are gratitude, awareness, and because you're not in control. And if you do believe in a God, then if you believe in a God that is issuing tumors just to see how you're going to handle it, that's not a God I want to believe in. So for me, it's the only way that I believe in natural consequences. Like I told my daughter, one of his things that Rabbi Kushner said was, if God created the earth, he created gravity. And if you stand a little too close to the edge of that mountain, you're going to probably fall off and you're going to die. And that wasn't God's plan for you, but you should have been paying attention or maybe not taking a selfie,
Right.
So it happens, but it wasn't like God was like, oh, I needed Joey in my angel choir today, which some people believe,
Oh, I did for a while.
Yeah,
I did. That was something that helped me, as I said, because she was such a sweet girl. She was one of those people that like you would walk in the room and everybody would want to be around her. Like she was just one of those people. And that's what I told myself is that, I said, well, she's a missionary on the other side.
Yes.
And
you guys, in the meantime, you guys have been married in the temple.
So we had.
You had an eternal family, and so that gave you solace. And
and we would be together, and all those things. So so that was the one thing that I started just logic gets you every time. And so then I started, okay, I don't feel comfortable at church. Like I think it started with, this is boring, and then it turned into, it doesn't make sense. Like, why are we doing this thing every day for no reason whatsoever? Like, what? It just felt so fake, just fake.
Oh, interesting.
Like made up. Like,
right.
Is this really what God wants us to be doing with our time? Like, those kinds of things.
Yeah, simple rote activities that are just mechanical and
and I think I would have been okay with it if I felt like we had been actually progressing. Like I was the primary teacher and I was teaching the same things to these 11-year-old girls as we were learning in Relief Society or Sunday school as grown adults. So, if there were something more coming, maybe I could have stayed with it, but I was like, this is just weird. Like
same old. Yeah.
Weird.
I remember
and
I got to a point where it's like, I'm not teaching them this, I'm not teaching them that they should be planning their temple marriage. I'm not teaching them that, I'm like, we're going to talk about careers. I just can't do this,
So, so our 11-year-old girls, and I don't know if any one of my parents will ever see this, and I will feel a little bit guilty if they do, but there were two teachers in that. Yeah. I know, there were two teachers in there, and both of us were kind of in the same headspace. And we were like, this is so boring. They don't care. I don't care. And we started teaching them things out of the seminary manual. Because we're like, they don't need all this that we already know. And then we started actually teaching them, like, we had a lesson once about body autonomy in our class. We had a lesson about what's appropriate.
In the 90s, or are we into the 2000s?
No, this was just, I would say, this was probably 2018, somewhere in there. So not that long.
Yeah, that's still, we're still hiding the gospel topic essays. So,
I didn't know anything about those. No,
So it's still similar stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it was probably 2020. It was all of, honestly, it was John Dehlin. So one of my
John Dehlin, it's all your fault.
But I was ready. I just was it was not making sense to me. It was not feeling good anymore. It was blah. It was just blah.
How did you find out about Mormon stories?
From a friend.
And were they going through some kind of a faith crisis?
Yep.
And they're like, have you heard? And you were like,
yep.
What?
And I was like, no, I haven't. What is this? And so I started listening. And at the time, my husband and I were painting our house. See the beautiful yellow and red paint. And we did it all on our own. Isn't it pretty? Yes.
Great color.
And so it was during COVID. We're all stuck at home. What are we going to do? Painting our house. listening to podcasts, and I was like, what? All of these things that I was raised in the church, and maybe I'd heard of little tiny pieces of them, but what? You never put them together. Like you never put them together. And then B, all those little extra things that I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like I kind of heard Joseph Smith was a polygamist. I'd kind of heard that, but I didn't know all of those. He was doing things behind Emma's back.
Any story,
No, I did not. And that was hard for me. I cried for a couple days, and it was because I felt so terrible that my family didn't rip her out of there and go, we are out. We are gone. Yeah. No, you know what they did is they dropped her off at the next town and they went back and they're like, we're in. And that's why I'm in.
Now, and I'm sure you brought this up to your mother, right? I mean, because it is a family. My great-great-grandmother was, sexually abused and coerced into a relationship. So did you ever talk to your mother about? No.
I love my mom. She's fantastic, but we don't. So she's remarried. My dad had passed away a few years before my daughter. And she's remarried. The man she's married is awesome. He's very sweet, but he's even more into the church than my dad. And my mom loves it. It's great for them. They read scriptures together. They pray together. It's awesome for them. But she would have a hard time talking about those things. Like, I think she would feel, and maybe I'm making things up in my mind, but I don't want her to feel uncomfortable. And I don't want her to feel like I'm pushing things on her. And I don't know how much she knows. And maybe someday I'll feel a little more comfortable talking to her about it, but I haven't talked to her about it.
Which Mormon stories did you start out with? Like, do you remember what the first one was that you watched?
I don't remember. I wish I could say. I do remember one woman, and I don't know her name. I even tried to go back and find it, but as she was telling her story about coming out of the church, it was my story. It was my story. All of like the way she was raised, the things that bothered her, all of these things, it was my story. And I thought, this is me. And it just helped me so much to see that it's okay. Like, these things are okay. You're going to come out okay. And I wish I could remember her name. I even went back to find it because as I'm going through all this, my husband doesn't know. And so I was finally like, okay, I have to tell you something. Like, because I'm listening on headphones. He doesn't know that I'm listening to these things. And I'm like, I have to tell you something. And this was probably a week in to me. Like, I was out pretty quickly when I started listening to these things. I was like, I'm done. Because I was kind of already there, before. And so I said, I have to tell you something. And he was like, really? I was like, yeah. And so I wanted him to listen to that specific podcast because I said, this tells you how I feel. She can tell you what I'm feeling, what I'm going through. And it helped a lot because he was able to listen to
it.
He did. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So that's great.
Here's the crazy part. Not maybe 5-7 years beforehand, I could feel that he was not way in. Now, I don't know how much of it was he never really was all the way in, or how much of it was just me wanting him to be that perfect man that he would never be. And I remember going to Temple Recommend interviews and talking to the bishop and talking to the stake president and saying, I don't know what to do. Like, he's not being that person. Like, I have to do it all. I have to do the prayer, and I have to do the scripture study, and I have to do, not only that, I wrote a book about how to study the scriptures with your children. It's on Amazon. Because I had to do it all right. And when I talked to the bishop, and you know what they told me was this, oh, that's normal. That's usually the way that goes. That's totally normal. And I was like, but they don't tell us that in church.
No,
they don't.
But every woman will tell you that's exactly the way it is.
Yeah, but yet you're being taught this whole time that it's
your husband and his priesthood,
and they're in charge, and they're the ones who's supposed to be. I didn't know I was everybody else was the same way. I thought I was. My husband's awful because he wouldn't support his priesthood, right?
You're probably the third or fourth person that I've heard say that. And I was the absolute opposite. I mean, my husband is, he would drop everything to do his home teaching and,
Oh, my husband did his home teaching. He was fantastic as a
He's a
home teaching.
people person. Yeah, people person.
Yeah, he is just a good man. He's just a good man. And he did the things that needed to be done, right?
Yeah.
He did the things that mattered. And it wasn't until that I could see the opposite side where he was like, honey, we don't need to make all the kids sit down and read. Like, he's like, let's go bowling. Like, he's all over that. Like, let's go. You know what I mean?
And he was right.
Yeah, he was totally right. And here's me being all like, but
no,
scripture.
Yeah. So you had him listen to this story.
Yes.
And he's like,
so this is what's interesting. So 7 or so years beforehand, I said to him, I said, honey, I just want you to tell me the truth. Tell me the truth. If I died or if I left the church, would you still go? Like, do you actually believe it? Would you still go? And I was really asking because I felt like he didn't really have a testimony. And he said, yeah, I would go. I believe the church. Yeah, I would go. And I'm like, okay. I believed him.
Yeah.
So now fast forward 5 to 7 years later, when I say to him, honey, I think I'm out. So in his mind, can you just imagine he's thinking, is this a test?
Yeah.
Because a few years ago, you mentioned, is this a test?
So, I gave you that answer.
Yeah. So such a good guy. And this whole time, I was this close. I was close to divorcing him before all of this happened. I was this close. He actually said to me, so during this time, I was going back and getting a teaching certificate. I got my master's in teaching and all these things. And he said to me later, after all of this, he said, I thought you were going to leave me after you got a job.
He thought you were getting prepared, getting a job so that you were financially prepared to leave him because he was not the priesthood holder.
He was not the priesthood holder. And what was funny was I was talking to my friend, and she's the same one who introduced me to John Dehlin. And I said to her, I cannot put into words why I'm not happy. I can't put it into words. I cannot explain. I am miserable. And I was blaming it all on my husband, that it was his fault because he wasn't good enough. He wasn't doing these things. And, and I was trying so hard. And, it was, and then when I finally took that step and said, no. And he listened to it. He was like, this is crazy. When he started listening to all those Joseph Smith things and Rockin' the Hat and the polygamy and all these things that he probably didn't know anything about because he wasn't raised in the church. Right. Even when he was in the church, he was out to sea half the time. And then he was put in with the Boy Scouts. So he doesn't know any of this. Right. And so he's like, this is crazy. And he was like, if you're out, I'm out. I'm like, I'm out. He's like, I'm out. And we're out at the same time. And it was overnight. Our marriage was 180.
Because now it was all about him as a person.
Yes.
Not about some weird list of things to do.
And it was the weirdest because even when I wasn't happy, I even told my friend, I said, there's nothing I could say. Like anyone in the world, if they had my husband, they would go, you are so lucky. Right. But yet I'm not happy, and I just can't explain it. And until I let all of that stupid crap that doesn't matter, that was weighing us down, that was never, you can't do all that. You cannot do it all. And now I can.
Times that's, especially now, because you've heard the stories of people that, the woman leaves the church or whatever, and the husband goes into the bishop and he goes, you should get divorced, and so it's not uncommon for that even to be the thought process, especially for the men, because they can do polygamy. So they don't even have to divorce you in the temple to get another one, and to think that somebody, like you say, I hate to say it, but a good man is hard to find. I'm going to go back to that song. And dang, we've got some great men that just are like, I can't, I don't know what to do. She's not, I'm either in, I'm out, and it's just insane. This whitewashed image of, well, like today I'm driving home and I turned on conference so I could listen to it in the car. And whoever was speaking was talking about how he and his wife were doing a service project. And his wife said, something's wrong. I have a premonition. Would you go check on our kids? And I'm going to go back and listen now that I'm home so I can find out who this was. So anybody that's listening, they're going to go, oh yeah. So he didn't do it. But when they were done doing the dishes and cleaning up after this service project, they went and found their kids, and their little 18-month-old baby had fallen in a bucket and had drowned and died. And so he's from another country, so he has a pretty strong accent. But it was the most, talk about a cognitive dissonance. He's telling this story, and he says, so my wife and I learned a lot of things, and even though my wife didn't blame me, I had a hard time forgiving myself. But I've learned some things. Number one, you always listen to your wife, and the audience just starts laughing. And I'm like, that's not funny. No. That's exactly what should have happened. But because of the patriarchy and the presiding crap that's taught, I don't know why. I mean, that's my own story. I'm telling you.
And let me tell you,
go and say, okay, honey, I'll go check on the kids. And she knew,
And the thing that's so frustrating about that to me is not only, he should have gone and checked on the kids, but not only that, now she's going to be able to hold it over his head forever that, you didn't go check on the kids. And so when do you know that this is something that frustrated me my whole life? When do you know it's your brain just talking? And when is it God talking to you? When my daughter was sick, so we were visiting, and when she got sick, she had the flu. I don't know. She was sick. Kids get sick, Right. And so, and when do you go, I think they need to take her to the doctor. I need to take her to the ER, right? Or when do you go, well, if I go to the ER, we're just going to sit there for 3 hours and they're going to go, yeah, she's sick, take her home. Like, when does this happen? And where is the line of like, God's telling me that I need to take my kid to the doctor? Like, and so
if you would have had a happy ending, that would have been the story that you told. Because that's how our culture has defined these stories. Yeah.
So now, are you telling me now that God is punishing them because they didn't listen? So now the punishment is that your kid's dead? Like, thanks.
Yeah. Well, that's a trial. You could have gone with the prior, but dying children, that's a good one too. I mean,
I have a hard time with it, just because if you're gonna say that God is talking to you, well, God better gosh darn send me a note from a dove or something.
Could we have an angel? An angel at the foot of the bed. If it's going to be,
I don't even want an angel. I want something I can touch. I want something I can hold in my hand.
Yeah. Well, Tricia, we could talk for another hour. I can see that, and I believe we are going to. Awesome. We're going to get together now, just for the audience to know. Tricia is a teacher. She actually has a job, and hours are very restricted. So we might make Sundays might become our time, which I love.
Love it.
So that might become our my new talk time for She Became Visible. But I loved hearing your story, and I want to get to know you more. Yes. And so we're audience we got a co-host here, so this is going to be fun, and this is going to be, and I mean, because we've just started, and like you said, it's 2022 now. I believe it was the same thing, the beginning of COVID, and I kept hearing. I wish I would have written this down, honestly, because I kept hearing, must have been from some other podcast, but I didn't really start listening to ex-Mormon podcasts before I heard of John Dehlin. And I don't know where I believe I heard something about the CES letter. Okay. And I honestly kind of downloaded it and started reading it. And I was one of those people that was like, what's the big deal? So they don't have steel swords, whatever. He thought it was a taper, whatever. He was an unintelligent, unschooled farm boy. He thought it was a horse, whatever. And I didn't know a lot about American history. Right. And so my journey took me not only into the church history, but I started looking into Native American history and, the Revolutionary War and what was going on in 1812. And, and so it's led me down all of these paths to understand everything that was going on, the milieu of where these people were living and what they were hearing and what they were reading. And it's such a different thing than just, but it did lead me. And what's funny, and I've told this story before, it led me to John DeLynn, but I'm like, no, I'm going to start, if I'm going to listen to Mormon stories, I'm going back to the very first one, and I will listen to everything. I'm not one of these people that reads the last chapter of the book, right? I'm going to start with page 1 and I'm going to read it until it's done. So I thought I will start with his first one, which he was an active member at that time. So I thought this is safe. He's just going to give me some knowledge. I'm just going to get some knowledge. And so then that would lead you down the rabbit hole because somebody would mention a book. And so I would read that book. And then you read Rough Stone Rolling, and then you read No Man Knows My History. And then, and then you're like, I had 6 children in the back of a red station wagon singing Book of Mormon stories and gold plate pictures all over my house. Yes. And and the whole, And and now you're telling me it was a rock and a hat? I have a rock. I have crystals now. I got a jasper rock. So it's like, oh no, I don't know why I did angels. I guess I believed in angels, but now we've got rocks. I come on. And I just led me down the path, but that's in the past. Anyway, so I love, well, thank you so much. And I will get this posted and let's start this. And
I'm so excited.
Next Sunday, we'll get into a little bit of, maybe we'll talk a little bit about conference. And it's funny because I know a lot of people, because I've had people say this to me. My brother, in fact, said this to me. He said, why do you watch conference? You've left the church, leave it alone. Just go on with your life. And I said, because I have an active husband and I have to know what he's hearing. Because I don't want to be surprised, when he comes home with a couple other wives from Salt Lake, or deeded over our house to the church, or whatever crazy thing has happened in the past. Like it can't happen again,
I'm surprised. So I hadn't listened to conference until this one, when we were talking about maybe doing this, and I was surprised when I just listened to one session, and at least 2 of those talks were actually putting out fires from the ex-Mormon community that I was like, I wouldn't have known that when I was in. I would have been like, oh, what a great talk. Yeah.
My husband was a bishop and in the stake presidency, and he'd never heard of the gospel topic essays. So don't tell me they weren't being hidden, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to people that are true believers. And I get it. I mean, I understand that there are so many wonderful things about the church that they can look back and go, it doesn't matter. The church is, so rich and so powerful. There's no way it could not be God's church. And so I'm like, well, Catholic Church is doing pretty good. So
I agree. You just have to be good business people.
Yeah, there you go. Got some good lawyers.
All right. That's right.
Anyway, all right.
Thanks so much.
We will meet again next week, probably.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, audience. Become visible.
Yes.
Bye. This is where Maven comes in. Maven, how much? What did RFM say? My computer. I hate this computer. There we go. Okay. Bye.